called Skyhive. We are a skills intelligence AI platform that is focused on reskilling using the world's labor market intelligence. So we use AI and big data to synthesize the global labor market and put that data to work on behalf of learners, job seekers, governments and communities, as well as employers. And I'm joined today by a panel of both partners of Skyhive as well as those who work in the upskilling and reskilling ecosystem. Some of you might be aware that even though this is a district leaders summit, there was also a career changers, upskilling and reskilling summit scheduled for today, and that some of those agenda items have been combined or collapsed. So I will encourage during this session, if you have questions that pertain to the K-12 system or educating young people, to please ask those questions, because we are shifting somewhat our focus to appeal to K-12 educators and district leaders, but we are also working very solidly in the adult upskilling, reskilling, and workforce development space. And so we are focused on both youth as well as what happens to youth once they leave the K-12 system and how we intersect with them in the workforce system and through things like apprenticeships, boot camps, and upskilling and reskilling non-credential training. So with that said, I will start with a bit of an icebreaker question, and I will apologize, we are one panelist down. Unfortunately, one of our very dear partners, Bridget Gray from Opportunity at Work, tested positive for COVID. She's unable to join us today, so I'll speak a little bit on her behalf. For those who may be unfamiliar, Opportunity at Work is a national nonprofit that is focused primarily on researching, understanding, and advocating on behalf of STARS. What are STARS? STARS is an acronym that translates to Skilled Through Alternative Routes. So while you may have heard the acronym STARS in certain contexts as it relates to the education system, in the world of adult workforce development, upskilling, and reskilling, it refers to individuals who have skills to do the work of the digital future that they have gained through a variety of alternative routes to a bachelor's degree. And that could be some college, it could be an associate's degree, it could be military service, it could be apprenticeships or boot camps or online learning, it could even be skills gained through on-the-job experience. And so when we talk about STARS, those are who we're talking about. And why are STARS important? Not to put words in Bridget's mouth, but they are, in the US, a population that is legion. 70 million plus individuals are STARS in the US. It is more than half of the working age population of our nation. And why is that important? Well, because up until the very recent past, more than 2/3 of job descriptions actually required a bachelor's degree as a minimum job requirement. That's pretty difficult when over half of the working age population doesn't have a bachelor's degree. They have the skills to do the work, but they're effectively being screened out of that work by virtue of not having this signifier or proxy for skills. And so the work of Opportunity at Work, much like the work of Skyhive and the work of the folks on the panel today, is really to raise awareness about the skills that STARS have, to use technology in novel ways to surface those skills and connect them to the job market, and to help employers really understand the unique value that STARS bring in our labor market, to connect STARS to meaningful work and economic and career mobility, and to do so both through traditional as well as non-traditional career pathways and credentials, which may or may not include a bachelor's degree at some point in the journey. So with that said, that's the context setting on STARS. If you have any questions or any questions about Opportunity at Work and the work that we do together with Skyhive, please approach me at any time after the panel. But we'll start with an icebreaker, because each one of the panelists today works with STARS differently and has a different perspective on both the skills they bring into our labor market as well as the unique challenges and opportunities that exist for them. So please introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your organization and how you work with STARS. Jesse, I'll kick to you first.
Thanks, Allison. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us here for this session. Allison, thanks for the invite. Michelle, Charlie, looking forward to your comments as well. My name is Jesse McCree. I'm based in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania as the Chief Executive Officer for South Central Pennsylvania Works, which is a regional workforce development board that serves a population of about 1.5 million people in central Pennsylvania. quick show of hands here. Who knows what a workforce development board is? Don't be shy. Okay, pretty good. Half the room, it's not bad. Workforce development boards, we are one of about 550 across the country, and we are part of a national network, the publicly funded workforce development system that serves about a $5 billion investment in economic growth and mobility across our country. So as a workforce development board, we are at the front lines of serving those that are unemployed and underemployed as an engine for charging economic mobility for citizens across the country. So as a workforce development board, what we do is we serve to invest in, evaluate, and advance high-impact workforce development programs that really make a difference in allowing people to get that job, that next job, and really get them on a pathway for career success. In terms of sort of the work and how it relates to STARS, what I think is really interesting, and we'll talk more about this as we jump into some of the questions, but to kind of level set some of this conversation, I guess it's the elephant in the room, is that employers across the country and honestly across the globe are faced with a singular challenge right now. If you poll almost any business in almost any part of this country, one of their top concerns, what's going to keep them awake at night, is finding and keeping skilled talent. This is also on the backdrop of what has been, a lot of ink has been spilled around the demographic droughts, right? There is a declining birth rate in this country, there's an aging population, there are now almost 2 job openings for every 1 unemployed person. And these are, I would argue, and I think the research would back me up on this, not cyclical trends, but truly structural trends. So over the next 20 years, the #1 challenge for economic growth in this country is finding enough skilled workforce to charge our economy. So workforce development boards exist to not only bring people in from the sidelines into the labor market, but also make those workers more productive and adding value for our businesses. So STARS are ultimately the get to market quickly. And many of us here are probably beneficiaries of a 4-year degree. And so the STARS conversation is never exclusive of bachelor's degrees. But when employers come to me and they say, we have 200 job openings for software developers and DevOps, a bachelor's degree is nice to have, but they need that talent a lot sooner than in 4 years. So then it's incumbent upon regions and counties and economic development and workforce development, private sector and public sector to come together and say, how do we build an engine for economic growth that can get people into really good jobs quickly? And I would say, sort of before I turn it over to my panelists, I think what's most exciting for me about this is that this truly is an opportunity for us to rethink this idea, this dichotomy of career or college. And one of the things that we like to talk about in our organization is ROE squared, return on education and return on experience. Those two are not mutually exclusive. And so if we are working with STARS, those that are skilled through alternative routes, we're both looking at what is the return on education, both in the micro-credential or non-credential space, which certainly could lead into further degrees and credentials, but also the return on experience. What is the value of being able to work in a growing industry, in a growing sector, a growing occupation, and what's the return on that experience? So I think framing up all of this is the front lines of the United States economy, the demographic drought, we've got to solve this problem, and how do we think about this ROE squared, return on education and return on experience? So really excited to be a part of this panel. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle here.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Sims, and thank you, Allison, for having this esteemed panel together. I am leading a wonderful organization called UPro Placement. UPro stands for Year Up Professional Placement, and we're very unique. Though we're a staffing organization, we are a public benefit corporation, and we are owned by the nonprofit organization Year Up. Is anyone in the audience familiar with Year Up? Wonderful. So what a lot of folks don't know is that they also own a staffing organization to ensure that from a connection perspective, you've heard from both Allison and Jesse, you will hear from Charles as well, the connection piece to the employer is so key because of 8 million jobs and growing today that we have unfilled. And so how we work with STARS is support nonprofit organizations who are spending their time and efforts and funding on training stars, folks that do not have a 4-year degree typically, that are building their skills through alternative routes, all of those ways, certifications, some community college, boot camps, right? So there's a piece though that as folks come out of high school, how do you expect them to have experience without giving them experience? So we support that wage-based learning, that work-based learning piece, where it's a very high reward, low risk for employers to support building their own workforce from the ground up. And to the point of, with only 34% of our workforce holding a 4-year degree, without investing in that additional 66% that these folks are doing such a great job, we are the connector with getting them into Fortune 1000 organizations so that they have the experience for that career progression and economic mobility. So I feel like I'm the best because we get to connect and really make a difference. So I'm gonna turn it over.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for having us today, Allison. My name is Charles Cornish. I founded American Apprenticeships Work. We're an apprenticeship intermediary where we help organizations quickly adopt apprenticeship programs. And if you're not familiar with apprenticeship programs in the more modern term, they're not just for the trades, they're not just for making boots, they're for things like modern skills like technical IT, cybersecurity, data analytics, digital marketing. And so it's a great tool to utilize, but a lot of organizations don't know how to do that. And so we help them get these programs set up and run them. And most importantly, we bridge the pipeline to help them hire people who are stars into these positions. And as Allison said, if you have a college degree requirement, you're excluding about 70% of the working population. And so this is a way to truly remove that credential or replace it with something else. And so we always say, you can hire potential, not credentials, which a lot of companies want to do, but this is a system where they can actually do that, put it in place, train the people they want on the job, and retain them within the organization.
Charles, I really see you, and I love hearing this because I got my start in workforce development building apprenticeship programs at the behest of employers in the city of San Antonio, Texas. They actually came to the city and said, unless you can help us solve this talent and labor challenge, we can't stay here, and we'll move our projects back up to the Pacific Northwest. And we collaborated across 26 different independent school districts to make that happen so that students starting as sophomores in high school could begin that journey of apprenticeship. So my question to you, having seen this on both sides of the pond, having done it in an international context and really seeing what works and what is promising, what do you see as best practices in apprenticeship design and operation that this audience should consider? And how should educators be thinking about building apprenticeship into the K-12 model so that we can have more of those on-ramps into both trades as well as digital jobs of the future as part of our pedagogy for students?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think best practice, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is a system that exists in the US. There's probably not as much of awareness as we would like for it, but you can go out there, find intermediaries like us who can help you connect the dots that you need to really get going extremely fast. And by extremely fast, I mean really in under 6 months if you're asking the right questions to the right people. There's nonprofits out there who can help you with the paperwork. So when you want to do an apprenticeship, especially if you're registering with the US government, you have to understand the job occupation. You have to understand how to register it. We usually lose most employers by this point in the conversation. Once you have that registered, you have to actually run it. And so there's a lot of ways to get this done where you do not have to do it yourself. So go out there, ask questions. There's a lot of organizations on all ends of the funnel that can help you out with this. And the second part of the question was?
I think in addition to best practices, what are some of the differentiated parts of this that, as students, how can we bring more of this into the pedagogy so that students can have that work-based learning, that experience that they're gaining as part of the K-12 experience? I think it also helps with career discovery now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think awareness is a big challenge with this. What we've encountered with people in high school and in college, they don't know that these kind of apprenticeships are a thing yet. So I would say bringing wareness to it. We just heard from the panel before that they're working on IT programs, cybersecurity programs, where they're building that funnel. They're really getting people invested in this and interested in this, but connecting those dots to get those students who are getting out of school who maybe haven't decided what they want to do for college. Maybe they want to go to college, but they want to pursue this career, to know that that's an option, and then connecting those dots.
follow-up question.
Yes.
Charlie, I know that you focus on certain types of apprenticeships that have broad applicability.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the, what are some of those broadly transferable types of apprenticeships that you would recommend
Yeah.
if districts are thinking about apprenticeship models or expanding some of the apprenticeship work that they're doing? What are some of the more promising or more transferable areas that American Apprenticeships work focuses on?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work on programs like cybersecurity, which cybersecurity, you need to know a lot of technical skills in order to run IT support. Same thing with digital marketing. If you're going to do digital marketing, there's a lot of very specific skills around that. But we're also seeing a big uptick in things like professional skills. So the soft skills that are required for the job, but also data analytics, where you're not, again, learning to be becoming a data scientist, but learning how to look at data in a new way, take data and create reports, bring those reports to management so management can make informed decisions, really unlocking tools for a company that didn't exist before. And so we see those kind of broad professional skills as transferable across the organization. We work with electrical contractors and media agencies who are training these specific skills in every single vertical in their company. So a person in accounting, a person in sales, a person in marketing, most of these skills are the same. Then you just have to tweak it for what they're going to learn specifically. So we're noticing that the skills of the future, the 21st century skills, truly are digital and technical skills. And most of those apply to most jobs that we're finding, unless, again, it's something like cybersecurity, which you want someone who is very good at cybersecurity running your cybersecurity.
Fair enough. Michelle, as an executive in the staffing industry, I know you're actively a huge advocate cultivating a culture of equitable inclusion, specifically for historically overlooked populations. Can you help us understand what are leading edge employers doing differently? How are they really modeling what others need to be thinking about to be skills-first organizations, to employ stars effectively, to make the most of their potential? And also, what are some considerations that educators, both at the K-12 and undergraduate or community college levels, need to think about, given that they are dealing with early career individuals who may not have as much experience or skills to surface to those employers?
Sure. So first part, I think when we say leading edge and cutting edge of what employers are doing, I think it's really important to understand what the status quo is, because if you don't know what the status quo is, you don't necessarily have that perspective of what they're doing leading edge. So I would say from a recruiting perspective, especially in an economic crisis, in a recession, we fall back to traditional methods. We do the path of least resistance to hire, and for 20 years now, that path of least resistance is a 4-year degree and or job titles as a proxy for employment in that role. And studies have shown that that is not necessarily the case, and that's where the stars come in play. So cutting edge employers are realizing that they do need to build their workforce from the ground up, and if they don't start looking at skills as a proxy versus just job titles and degrees, then these 8 million jobs unfilled will continue to be unfilled and it will grow. So from a cutting edge perspective, building skills first or skills-based hiring, if you've heard that term all over the place these days, that is really where like the technology comes into play. How are you looking at your workforce from a skills perspective? And then the second part, in your communities, it's a shoulder-to-shoulder collaboration of technology and practical, just overall, what do we need to build our communities and economies? And what we're focusing on is, it's not just the technical skills that our talent need. So from a K through 12 perspective and beyond, really understanding your communities, the companies, the industries, the jobs. What are the skills needed in those jobs? And then working together with workforce boards, nonprofits, and private sector. What do you need to do to build talent in the community that are stars, and really, really focus on the programs to build the skills, and not just the technical skills, because what employers are saying is certification, great, right? Training program, great, but technical skills alone are not getting stars employed. We need professional, durable skills baked into technical support, And that's where that shoulder-to-shoulder collaboration comes in, because not every one entity can do it by themselves. So I would say cutting-edge employers are looking at the ecosystem holistically, and they're saying, how do we pull together nonprofit? How do we pull together workforce boards? How do we, in the private sector, all take accountability? And it starts in high school. It starts in realizing that college is not the path for everybody. And so how do we build skills in our communities for STARS to ensure that we are investing in our own community from a career and economic mobility standpoint?
Speaking of shoulder-to-shoulder collaboration, I know that Jesse, you sit sort of, the workforce board often sits at the nexus of that shoulder-to-shoulder collaboration. Sometimes effectively, sometimes maybe less effectively. You, I think, are an example of effective shoulder-to-shoulder collaboration. Can you talk a little bit about, for the audience, regardless of where they are in the nation, how can they effectively engage with their local workforce board? How can they focus on this for young people and for STARS? And what are some recommendations that you would make? Because I know you're also using technology in innovative ways in order to do some of that skills inference and using skills in novel ways to guide STARS in your journey.
Yeah, it's a great question. Can I have 25 minutes to answer that? There's a lot of good stuff there. So first of all, if you are not connected, so there's a workforce board in every one of our communities, to your point. There's 550 across the country. If you are not connected to or working with your workforce development board, pick up the phone, jump on the website, get connected to your local workforce development leaders. It is truly, I think, an untapped, overlooked to some degree, opportunity engine for economies to grow. The other thing too about that is collaboration, right? We talk all day about collaboration, but to me, the two biggest barriers that I see across communities to actually moving the needle with regards to economic mobility is, if you can get past these two barriers, your community is really doing something. It's who's getting the money and who's getting the credit, right? So just as a general litmus test for how communities are working together, workforce boards have dollars, but they cannot do it alone. I see Lynn picture of the choir here, based in Dallas, the workforce board professional. And you know this really well. It's education, it's K through 12, it's post-secondary, it's higher education, it's the private sector, it's public sector, and all of us need to come together and really think through sort of thoughtful and strategic ways to ensure that somebody who's graduating high school or graduating college, the likelihood that that individual will not need any sort of professional development or certification or lifelong learning, the likelihood that that person graduating high school or college is not going to need any further education is 0%. And I don't care what field someone's in, whether they are a welder or in cybersecurity, they are going to need some sort of ongoing professional development. So in light of that, I think this is why the conversation around STARS is so compelling. As a quick anecdote, this is the front lines conversation, I think, of your question, is there's two real brief stories in our work in Central Pennsylvania that typify what workforce development boards can do. There's one company that was notorious in our region for not hiring anyone. You could send the best candidate, the most qualified, bachelor's degree, and they're just the pickiest, most selective organization out there, right? And notorious in the region. And they reached out to me last year and they said, how do we get training in our school districts? How do we get our learning and development courses into correctional facilities? I mean, employers are coming to us as a workforce development board and saying, we can't find people, and so now we are going to previously untapped sources to find the people that we need to fill those jobs. And the second is they hired a person that came through one of our programs named Joshua, and Joshua was a star. I wish Bridget was here because Bridget said it really well. To keep in mind with stars, I think Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates were at one point stars as well, right? So this is not a monolithic demographic, right? But Joshua was a star and got employed at this organization. But the punchline for Joshua is that he had spent 20 years incarcerated. And this, to me, typifies exactly why skilling through alternative routes is so important. For a guy like Joshua who spent 20 years in prison and is now a manager at this company, it's because that company believed that there were things that showed value beyond just a bachelor's degree. On-the-job training, went through an apprenticeship program. These are critical strategies that communities need to be employing. and workforce boards are right at the front line of that.
Absolutely. What advice would you give today's students, their parents, their teachers, even their counselors about how to employ some of these alternative routes, non-degree credentials, boot camps, apprenticeships, as they think about post-secondary pathways, whether that includes college or whether at the moment it includes something that's not quite a bachelor's degree?
Yeah, to elaborate on my question or answer from earlier, the options out there for apprenticeships if you're in high school and you're looking. I remember when I was graduating high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I literally flipped a coin to go to decide at community college, and my path has gone from there. But at that time, apprenticeships to me were, again, the trades. There are now apprenticeships if you do any sort of search for a job for hiring. They're hiring out of high school, and they're hiring people based on potential. So I'd say look for it, and if you want to build it in your community, you can certainly build these programs, and you don't have to do it by yourself. So if there's a need and there's employers, you can connect those dots and you can make it happen.
Other thoughts? Other thoughts on advice or guidance you give to today's, and the reason I say this is because having done a fair amount of work in the advanced manufacturing space, so much of the resistance to skilled trades, to advanced manufacturing roles has come from parents, teachers, and counselors who either have an erroneous view of what those jobs today are like and consider them dark, dirty, or dangerous, and don't realize that they're actually quite technical and digital jobs. And in some ways, they're creating a friction that is dissuading today's students from jobs that are otherwise, digital, upwardly mobile, well-paying, with a lot of mobility behind them. So thinking about, even for educators, advice that we might give about how to help steer students and education programming constructively in these directions, sky's the limit.
Well, I'll just jump in here real quick, and then let me know when you want the mic. So I think an example that we use, and sometimes for me it's helpful to think practically around how would we strategize around this. So there is definitely a dichotomy between college or career. So in our region, we launched a couple years ago a program where every single high school graduate in our region, which I think is at this point 18,000 young people per year, our goal is by 2030, it's an ambitious goal, is to get every single one of those graduates an industry recognized credential. That is in addition to actually getting the high school diploma. And it becomes the way in which it's the thin edge of the wedge to pry that door open to say, many of those high school students in our region, it's a pretty high percentage, closing in on 80%, will end up going to college. But the industry recognized credential is the first way that people and parents, most importantly, begin to see that this is not the only pathway. So it becomes in healthcare, it becomes in IT, becomes in career and technical education, like manufacturing. The way in which parents begin to see you can get the industry recognized credential and you can go to a four-year degree, right? And so I think one thing that's important in all of this is it's not the or, it's the and. So for us, it's every high school student getting an industry recognized credential by 2030 is the beginning of the dialogue around how the workforce of the future can't simply be supplied by four-year degrees. We're gonna need something else in addition to that.
Incredible.
Yeah.
We need to cheer you on for that. It's incredible.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'll report back by 2030, right?
And I would say, where we really support is starting at age 18 with a high school diploma. I would say we go back to collaboration. There are organizations and nonprofits that will be intermediaries for internships for high schools to partner with. So the high school doesn't need to come up with this program on their own. There is a national program called Genesis Works, a nonprofit organization that comes into the high school and builds programming into high school with credentials, and then over the summertime provide paid or stipend internships over the summer. So now you're solving for some credentials, you're solving for experience. So there are programs out there, and I think it's high schools and superintendents being open to this collaboration and allowing people to come into their schools and say, okay, let's build these programs and build external opportunities where college may not be a path in a lot of communities because access to college and the cost of college is just not a factor for a very large portion of our population. So I think Genesis Works and others are out there that can really be a solution to these for superintendents and school systems alike.
In San Antonio, I'll echo that, because in San Antonio, across 26 independent school districts, the only thing that the superintendents and the ISD leadership needed to do was to make available the apprenticeships to their learning community and to identify students that, to make a course, an elective course available at the sophomore level for introduction to avionics and aerospace technology, and then to identify students who would be interested. And here we are 20 plus years later, that type of apprenticeship model is now a national standard. And for over 90% of the students that went through the Alamo Academies, they ended up being first generation college students. This was a community where 80% didn't end up getting bachelor's degrees, but now we have a much higher percent who pursue college, because by the time they graduate from high school, they have a salaried full-time job, an employer that's paying them tuition assistance to complete a degree, an industry credential that is a licensure that's recognized, dual credit in the community college system, all of these things that neither they nor their families have to take on any debt or subsidize or pay for themselves. And I think that's, you know, for a community like San Antonio, that was a real game changer for them, for their economy. And immediately after aerospace, information technology, bio, life sciences, and advanced manufacturing followed within the 5-year space of that first initial set of apprenticeship academies that rolled out. So where there's a will, there's a way. I think superintendent leaders can really be influential there. Since this is an EdTech conference, I'll close with sort of an open-ended question and any Q&As that want to come in. For EdTech builders, funders, founders, what kind of advice would you give for the folks who are designing for the STARS population? You work very intimately with this group, you have the domain expertise. What are sort of the guardrails or the pieces of guidance that you would give when you're designing for STARS that technology builders and funders really need to keep in mind and consider?
Yeah, I'll jump in from an apprenticeship perspective. It's early days and there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of problems to solve. So whether you're a founder or an investor, it's fertile grounds in early days. So no matter what part of the funnel you're looking at, really great things to be done and really great areas where technology is needed, but also where solutions are needed.
And I can speak from the recruiting perspective. I live in an applicant tracking system world, but I can tell you from a tech and an innovation perspective, how the collaboration in the ecosystem coming together in tech is fairly new. And there are organizations that are looking at how they connect nonprofit talent, STARS, and communities with staffing organizations and giving them access to employers. There's one called Rise that is up and coming, that connects talent from nonprofits. We're certainly one of them. There's an organization, Opportunity at Work, has Stellarworks. We'll give Bridget a shout out since she can't be here. They are creating a talent marketplace for untapped talent through tech. 110 is another nonprofit organization doing it. So there are nonprofits and public benefit corporations building technology to bring the ecosystem together. So it's out there and it's happening quick if you're a funder and an innovator.
Those are great answers. I would say, and you all probably know this, but tech will always be a tool, but people are the platform, right? We are in the people business, and I think we've seen this idea that tech will disrupt. Yeah, sort of, but at the end of the day, in order to get something that actually gets traction, tech will always be a tool, but people are the platform that we're working with. And my encouragement for EdTech startups or investors would be, just like politics, all education and workforce development is local. So building those connections with local community-based organizations and nonprofits, K through 12 leaders, superintendents, in order for this sort of work and a product to get traction, it has to be local. So design products and services and solutions with STARS in mind. I mean, the whole design thinking is, have you talked to a cross-section of those people who are being skilled through alternative routes? If not, that should be a primary sort of market research differentiator that you need to take.
I think as a person who works in tech but who comes from the workforce and economic development system, I'll just tag on one more, which is to say, consider employing domain experts who have worked in this space inside of your organization. They don't look like your typical SaaS or tech or startup employees, but their insights can be invaluable to shaping your go-to-market strategies, to helping with your product design, to really understanding your personas, both in terms of your buyer and your user. And without it, you really do run the risk of creating technology and pushing it out into the marketplace that either misses product market fit or is sort of forcing a solution to a problem that either doesn't exist or misses the problem in some way. And I think I'm really grateful, one, for partnership with people like Jesse, who are mavericks, experimenting with skills intelligence like Skyhive, but also being very constructive in the co-design process, letting us know ways in which AI serves and doesn't serve the workforce development population. Or folks like Bridget and Opportunity at Work, who use Skyhive APIs inside of StellarWorks and they are the experts in stars, and we don't pretend to be that expert, but we recognize the importance of human-centered design and therefore marry up a very thoughtful UI with an underlying technology that's quite powerful. So I think that also might be my guidance to the EdTech and skills tech world as they design for all of the opportunities that Charles has sort of underscored there, is to really think about how you can get that locality, even if it does mean sacrificing a bit of leverage initially, because the stakes are too high. We can't be Netflix for learning because none of us want the Tiger King of learning. And I will end on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for being here. We are going to move into our next segment. So just real quick, we will do that. Again, if you need the Wi-Fi or you need the agenda or anything, it is on that board. And about 20 minutes ago, food was